Welcome to a new daily top Askreddit video. Today's topic: those who have been in a coma, what was it like? I was in medically induced coma for about a week. The coma itself is not much to talk about. There is just a gap in your memory, even from before it happened. I don't even remember the accident that brought me there in the first place. Waking up from it is much different story though. Since I was fully dosed by painkillers and sedatives and whatnot, I was basically high as kite, and since the trauma I suffered was very serious, my brain constructed very stressful, vivid nightmares I remember to this day. Do you think your brain was trying to wake you up? I'm not really sure. It was more like the shallow sleep just before you wake when you're semi-aware of your surroundings but you're also half dreaming. The former made me realize I'm in the hospital and that something bad happened, could not figure out what though. The latter combined with the said meds made the experience utterly terrifying. But yes, at some moment I realized that I need to wake up, but I didn't know how. Also, there were several timelines concurrently going on in my head, as crazy as it may sound, and I could not determine which one is the correct one to wake into. None of them was the correct one, although the fragments of reality were present in each of them, and I didn't have a conscious or any other control over choosing between them. It's not like I chose my reality, it's more like those delusional ones receded eventually. It's called ICU delirium. Some people feel things are being done to them, like being buried alive or having legs and arms amputated. I had ICU delirium and had the most intense and horrifying delusions. I didn't know a mind could go to such dark places, but mine did, and it scared me half to death. It has taken months to get some of what I thought I was experiencing out of my head. I was in a very short coma, 6 days, after a brain hemorrhage. I recall nothing during the coma. I have a fuzzy understanding of my first week or two after waking up, having pieced it together by the stories I was told. And memories of the days leading up to it were temporarily wiped out, though they have since returned. This was over a decade ago, so take this with a grain of salt. My memory in general is imperfect at best. Edit: I should mention that my coma was induced so they could stabilize me and drain the blood via my skull. My mum had the same thing. Unfortunately hers was so severe and she died 5 days into her coma. I'm kind of glad that you don't remember your coma, because I like to think her last moments were having fun with her family, not being scared knowing she was gonna die. I'm sorry for your loss. Edit: please be respectful in the replies. My wife was in a coma for about a month. At first I didn't bring the kids up because of how she looked, but in the 3rd week her color was closer to normal and there was less stuff going on, as she was pretty stable compared to the first 2 weeks. I had told the kids that while mom wasn't responsive there was a chance could she hear us, so they should be as brave as they can and sound as happy as they can. I described to them everything I thought that might spook them, from the tubes and wires to things beeping randomly and doctors and nurses coming and going. They were awesome. Even in the initial shock at seeing her with a ventilator, they were vocally loving, hugged and patted, held her hand, etc. We sat in the room a while and just talked. At one point I asked the kids what their favorite vacation was. Instead of our Disney and Universal Studios trips, they both agreed it was the road trip we took from Vegas down to Arizona, driving all over and seeing all the incredible sights. We talked about rides and amusements in Vegas, then Hoover Dam, the Grand Canyon, the Painted Desert, cave dwellings, petrified forest, silly road stops, a cheap motel we stayed in, Flagstaff. We laughed and cried, just a little. It was as nice as it could be. They kissed her goodbye saying see you soon. My wife heard it all but in a hallucinatory way. She now has, to this day, near 10 years later, a vivid memory of a second Arizona vacation she went on with us. She even asked me early on after she woke up if we had gone on a vacation recently. Her mind went through every detail we talked about and even added onto it as if it all actually happened, and the memories of it are as real as any. I was in a coma for almost 3 months and lost all memory from a few hours before the coma until waking up in a different hospital. I had a few vague dreams of people standing very close and shouting at me how I would be okay. I later met my chief surgeon, several operations while I was out, and nurses, and while I didn't recognize any of them, their voices were very strongly familiar. Good on you priming kids that a patient in a coma may be able to hear even if they cannot react. I was kicked in the face by a donkey as a kid and lost everything from that morning until 3 days later when I woke up. The time skip was freaky, but what was even weirder for me was that I went to see a movie next weekend and felt like I had seen it before. Turns out my brother had seen it while I was out and he and my dad discussed it while sitting with me. Ruined Spider-Man 2 for me. 10 days I don't remember anything about. Not sure if it is a blessing or a curse. Hit by a drunk driver. My wife and I lived, our daughter didn't. To me that stuff on TV where the pint wakes up and everything goes back to normal is bullshit. When I woke up I was in a conversation with another pint. Air Force had sick bays, not individual rooms. I can only compare it to a computer. I had been hung in an update and then, flicker, new screen. I had woken up several days earlier, but nothing stayed with me. My wife says I was paranoid that they were putting acid in my IV. Because I was tripping. I was hostile and aggressive. I read the medical records, they kept me restrained for a couple of days after I hit a nurse. I started acting normal so they moved me from ICU to the sick bay. The blessing is forgetting 10 days of some pretty intense pain. I was broken in a lot of places and bruised in all the rest. Never knew you could bruise some of them. That freaked me out. The curse was I wasn't there when my wife needed me most. There is that tinge of guilt that she faced that grief alone for 10 days. I know, couldn't be helped. Not my fault, but live through it and tell me how it feels. The number of stories in this thread that start with hit by a drunk driver is rage-inducing. As is the number of poster who were hit by people texting. And I'll bet people who would never get behind the wheel drunk will pick up their phones without thinking about it. Put the damn phone down while you're driving, folks. It'll all still be there when you get where you're going. And you're a lot less likely to put someone in a coma, including yourself. Reading all these, this one hits me hardest. I'm so sorry about your daughter. I couldn't imagine losing mine, much less doing so under these circumstances where you don't even get the closure of a funeral or anything. I hope you and your wife are okay these days. I had meningitis when I was 12, which got misdiagnosed for stomach flu and ended up with me being taken to the hospital last minute. The last memory I had was falling asleep watching the emergency news on the Brussels airport attack. I later on had a sort of fever dream, which ended up to be true, about my parents driving me to TGER saying it's okay over and over again. I couldn't move or talk, so it seemed more like a dream than something that was actually happening. I saw the lights of the parking lot which made me close my eyes, and after that it was like taking a nap. I had no awareness of time at all. It's like going to sleep and just waking up what feels like a second later, but it's actually morning already. I woke up 6 days later, highly drugged, but only gained consciousness the day after. My first memory after waking up is opening my laptop in the hospital bed to play Minecraft. I have no idea what happened or what I said when I woke up before that. Wakes up from a coma. Shrugs and starts up Minecraft. Those diamonds won't mine themselves. I had a motorcycle wreck a few years ago. Someone texting blew a stop sign and 8 ended up T-boning them. Not sure if coma is the correct term, but I was definitely unconscious for 2 days, honestly just felt like the worst, least refreshing nap in the history of naps. Had the wreck on a Sunday, woke up sometime Tuesday afternoon/evening and asked if the bike was okay. It wasn't. I'd love a bike one day, but stories like this always scare me off them. My dad used to live in Vietnam and ride with him mates, and the amount of horror stories has scared the shit out of me. I spent 5 years in Selenium, Asia, and honestly Vietnam is the worst traffic I've been in. However, the difference is that people are constantly paying attention to other traffic there. It's extremely rare that some accident happens just because someone didn't see something coming. I also ride a motorbike in the Netherlands, and in a way it's more dangerous, because motorbikes are rare and only for fun, and drivers aren't used to them and literally don't see them because they are not expecting something different than a car. Edit, traffic in Sigo for your viewing pleasure, https://www.youtube.com. Not me, but my dad has described his coma after his car accident. He was pulled up a little too far at a stop sign, and a guy who was speeding and on his phone swerved off the road. So he was in a coma for about 2 months. On my end, it wasn't like the movies. He didn't just wake up miraculously. It was 2 months of steady improvements. One eye opened, then a few days later his other eye was half open, then he could wiggle a toe, then he could move his fingers, etc. On his end, he said he could hear bits and pieces of what was happening around him, but it was like a dream that he couldn't wake up from. When me and my 2 younger siblings would come in and talk to him, his heart rate would go down. When a football game was on and his friends came to sit with him and watch it, the nurses made them turn it off once his team started losing because his heart rate blew up. Edit, he's a fan of the Miami Dolphins, so I guess his hour never fully returned to normal. Edit 2, an award. I've never got an award before. But seriously, thanks for the awards and the stories, guys. I don't know why this is so funny to me. Imagine being in a coma, and your team losing affecting you this much. I feel like there's some comedy gold in there somewhere. There was this story a while back with a similar situation. A Buckeyes fan started showing improvements during a coma when people asked if he liked the Michigan Wolverines. He did not.